Good morning, Cross Timbers. Let us lift our hearts in worship to Jesus. He is the solid rock on which we stand.
Hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but only trust in Jesus' name. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but only trust in Jesus' name. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all. When darkness seems to hide His face, I rest on His unchanging grace. In every high and stormy gale, my anchor holds within the veil. Christ alone, cornerstone, weak made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all. He is Lord, Lord of all. Christ alone, cornerstone, we made strong in the Savior's love. Through the storm, He is Lord, Lord of all. And He shall come, the trumpet sound. Oh, may I then in Him be found, just in His righteousness alone. Faultless we stand before the throne. Faultless we stand before the throne. Walking around these walls, I thought by now they'd fall, but You have never failed me yet. Waiting for change to come, knowing the battle's won, for You have never failed me yet. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet. I know the night won't lie. Your word will come to pass. My heart will sing your praise again. Jesus, you're still enough. Keep me within your love. My heart will sing your praise again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me. Promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never failed me yet. Sing, you move the mountains, and I believe I see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way, and I believe I see you do it again. I see you move the mountains, and I believe I see you do it again. You made a way when there was no way, and I believe I see you do it again. 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 Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never failed me yet. It is well.
Hey, good morning, church. I'm excited to be with you again and excited to continue our study of the God of Moses. And if you were with us last week, you'll recall the interaction between Moses and his God. And God appeared to him through a burning bush, and he announced himself with this declaration that this God, the one true God, is the I am who I am. Meaning that this God always has been and always will be, that he is unchanging and he is faithful for all of eternity. And this morning, we're kind of continuing forward with that, and we're going to see another layer of this God. And he reveals himself this morning in this passage as not only the God who's always been, but he's the God in control. This almighty, all-powerful God is the God in control. So last week, you'll remember, God was calling Moses to go to Egypt and to deliver God's people from slavery and oppression of the Egyptians. So we pick it up this morning as Moses is heading off to Egypt, and he picks up his brother on the way. You'll remember that Aaron was going to be his mouthpiece because of Moses' own insecurities. And we find he and Aaron arriving in Egypt. The first thing they do is they go and meet with the leaders, the elders of the Israelite people there in Egypt. And they meet together. They tell them, hey, God has shown up. He's been listening to your cries in the midst of your wilderness time of life. And he is going to deliver his people. Obviously, they're thrilled, they're excited. It's been a rough stretch for the Israelite people, so they can't wait to be freed from everything that's happened. So Moses and Aaron, they go and make an appointment to meet with Pharaoh. And you may remember, Pharaoh is really more of a title than a name. It would be like saying king. So they go to the Pharaoh, and they meet with him, and they sit down with him, and they say, hey, here's the situation. The God of the Hebrew people has called us, and we've got to go worship him. Listen to how it says it in Exodus 5, 1 through 3. It says, after meeting with the Israelite leaders, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh then said, who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let these Israelite people go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. So here we see this kind of showdown begin. And he continues, he then said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with the sword. Moses is making his case to Pharaoh. Please let us go. God's called us to this. We can't disobey him. But there's a unique thing at play here. In the Egyptian culture, the Pharaoh wasn't just a position. The Pharaoh was seen as a god himself. He was somebody who was seen to have some form of deity. They were a group of people, the Egyptians. They had lots of gods they worshipped, and Pharaoh was a very important figure in their worship. So Pharaoh, as he's sitting here going, oh, you're talking about a god who said we need to go worship him? He's probably thinking to himself, I'm a god. Who's this God that he thinks he can tell me what to do? And so this showdown between gods, if you will, begins to play out. Now the problem was, Pharaoh really didn't take kindly to this request from Moses. Not only did he shut down the request, but he also realized we may have a problem going on. See, the Israelite people, they were slave labor for Pharaoh and all of his leaders. They were accomplishing great things, building cities, building all kinds of stuff at his command as slaves. And so immediately he began to think, oh no, what would happen if they were to leave and suddenly I would lose my workforce? So he goes to his leaders and he said, here's the situation. We can't have the Israelites leave. We've got to keep them. I don't want them thinking about their God and whatever they think they need to do. Put them to work even harder. He told them, you know what? They're making bricks all day long. You need straw to be a binder in bricks. Don't give them the straw anymore. Make them go find their own straw. But tell them they can't slow down production a bit. They have to still produce the same number of bricks every day. If they don't do it, beat them. And so that's exactly what happened. And here we find a setup with the Israelite people that they heard that their God was coming to the rescue. Their God was finally going to redeem them and bring them out of this horrible place. But to start off, things only got worse. They got worse. They had to work harder. They weren't accomplishing what they needed to. They were being beaten, and they cried out to Moses. And they basically said, this isn't working. You said there was a God who was in control. They were going to come and rescue us and get us out of here. Now, this God, this I am, he's failed us. In fact, since you've shown up, things have only gotten worse. So we see then Moses having a conversation with God. It says he turned to the Lord and he said, "Oh Lord, why have you done evil to this people? Why do you ever send me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people, and you have not delivered your people at all." But then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will send them out, and with a strong hand he will end up driving them out of his land." The first thing I want us to see this morning is that we look at this God in control, is that just because he's in control doesn't mean everything in our lives is easy. But here's the important point. The God in control is present in pain. Our God, who is ultimately in control, even when we're going through a difficult, painful, awful, difficult, hard time, he is present there with us. We saw last week Moses, as he met with God for the first time, God said, "I've heard the cries of my people." Now as he's going to them to rescue them, things get worse. And immediately they're like, "Man, where is this God? What's going on?" And guys, I know in your life and in my life, we probably both have times, I know I do, that when times are difficult and get even more difficult, it seems like God is at a distance. It seems like the God who maybe theoretically is in control has taken his hands off of things and stepped back. But what God tells Moses here is, I am there and I am preparing to do a powerful work. Within this idea that God is present in our pain, there are a couple of things I want to touch on. First of all, when we're walking through pain in this broken world, pain, brokenness, loss, they're all ultimately a result of the brokenness and sinfulness in our world. Okay? When we experience loss, experience pain, and go through difficult times, it's because we're living in a sinful, broken world. Sometimes our pain is directly associated with sinfulness, either mine or somebody else's. You know, I've given this example before. If I go speeding down the highway, I break the law, I can't complain that I get pulled over and get a ticket because my sin caused the speeding ticket. Likewise, there are times in our life when somebody does something wrong against us and it causes us pain. Other times it's very indirect. You know, when somebody gets sick, when somebody passes away, when there's a virus ravaging through our world, it's the result of the fact that we live in a broken world. God has yet to fully redeem and restore all of his creation. And so what the Israelite people here were experiencing was the sinfulness and brokenness of the world around them. But here's another thing we have to understand. Our God, who's present in pain, never wastes an opportunity. In that place of pain, he's using it to accomplish something good in our lives. Romans talks about that, saying, you know, God uses everything to accomplish good in our lives. In fact, I really like Romans 5 that gives us a picture of this work that takes place sometimes in our lives. Romans 5, 3 through 4 says, But we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope here, that word means a confidence in God's goodness and his good plans for us. So actually, difficult times bring about growth in spiritual maturity in our lives. And I don't know about you, but I know for me, there are times in my life when things are difficult, and I look to God and I'm just like, God, do a miracle here. Sometimes he does, but sometimes he says that miracle is going to be you growing spiritually. And here we see, even with the Israelite people, God is preparing them for what's to come. He has to grow them to trust him, to love him, and to lean on him. Then there are other times in our pain that God goes, you know what? Yes, I'm going to use this to grow you spiritually, transform you, but I'm also going to do something miraculous and powerful here. Something you couldn't even imagine. I love Habakkuk, or Habakkuk, depending on how you pronounce it. He's a prophet that was crying out to God because of the brokenness he saw around him. And basically, he's crying out to God saying, God, aren't you seeing what's happening? When are you going to show up? When are you going to establish justice once again? And I love God's answer. He says, look among the nations and see, wonder and be astounded, for I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if I told you. You wouldn't even believe it if you heard it. And I've got to say, I look around our world today, and 3 months ago, we never would have imagined being in this place as a church or a nation or a world. And I've got this sense that if God told us what he was wanting to all do through this time, we wouldn't even believe him. God is preparing to not only work in our hearts to grow our trust and dependence on him, to grow us spiritually. I believe that he is working to bring about a miraculous revival in his global church. And I can't wait for us as a church to be a part of that revival. I promise you, God is with us in our pain. He's growing us, and he's preparing to do a work. Back to Moses in Egypt. After Moses and Aaron met with Pharaoh and heard that he would refuse to let them go, it initiated kind of a cyclical conversation and a cyclical response from both Pharaoh, Moses, and God. You may be familiar with the story, and basically Moses goes back to Pharaoh and he says, okay, all right, I'm going to tell you again. God says, let his people go. And if not, he's going to demonstrate his power through plagues. Obviously, Pharaoh said, nope, can't go, not going to happen. So we see the staff that we saw last week that turned into a snake. He reaches it over the Nile, and immediately the Nile becomes as blood. In fact, all the water in Egypt became blood. And basically, Moses is looking at Pharaoh saying, see, this God is in control. Now are you going to let him go? Nope, not going to do it. So next came the plague of frogs. Moses told Pharaoh, you know what, if you don't let these people go, there'll be frogs everywhere. Just as he said, there were frogs everywhere. This time it kind of got Pharaoh's attention. And this time Pharaoh's basically like, there are frogs everywhere, makes the comment, they were in their stove, they were in their bread bowls, they were in their bedpans, they were everywhere, it says. They were all over it. Pharaoh finally says, okay, fine. Please get rid of these frogs, and then I'll let them go. So just like that, we see Moses say, okay, I'll go talk to God. Talks to God, says, hey, we've made a deal. Let's get rid of the frogs. Immediately, all the frogs die. And once the frogs are gone, Pharaoh's like, sweet, I'm good to go. Oh, by the way, changed my mind, they can't go. So he continued to bring plague after plague from frogs. He went to gnats, which are basically like some type of a lice or something like that. Then it went to flies. Then he struck down all the livestock there. And then he brought boils on all the people. Then hail came, and everything that was hit with the hail was killed. It was so huge. Then locusts came and destroyed and devoured all the crops. And then he brought darkness on the land, days and nights on end. This cycle went back and forth, and towards the end, Pharaoh would finally give in and say, okay, if you take it away, I'll let the people go. Moses would talk to God, it would go away, and Pharaoh changes his mind. Happens over and over and over again. In all of this, God wasn't just doing this in a way to show off. He was using this as a process to establish who he actually was. Exodus 7:5 says it this way: "The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out the people of Israel from among them." This is all so that Pharaoh, the Egyptians, and all the Israelites will know that I'm the God in control, and I am the God above everything. This I am, this Yahweh, this God, He is one who is above all things. Now, in this passage, I do want to point out there's sometimes some debate that happens here. There are a lot of theologians, people a lot smarter than I, that will write books and make arguments because it makes a statement two different ways. Sometimes it says Pharaoh hardened his heart. Other times it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And there's kind of this debate, was God just manipulating Pharaoh? Was Pharaoh doing it on his own accord? I want to say this, instead of arguing over all the semantics, God was proving a point that He was in control and over all things. Our God is above and over all things. And He works, even as we see in the plagues, sometimes within the laws of nature and sometimes outside the laws of nature. I actually came across an article a while back written from somebody who's not a believer, but they were looking at it as a historical account. And they were trying to make an argument that, okay, there was actually a red algae that came into the Nile River, and then that caused all the frogs out. And since the frogs all died because of the algae, then there were gnats everywhere, and obviously the dead frogs brought flies. And this whole process. And the reality is, sometimes God uses laws of nature to accomplish His work. Sometimes He demonstrates that He's even above the laws of nature. For instance, the first 3 plagues, they fell on both the Egyptians and the Israelites. But plagues 4 through 9 only happened to the Egyptians. All of the Israelite people were spared from those. And I think it serves to remind us that sometimes when we're going through difficult times, to understand that we don't always understand why God allows all of those things to happen, but He's still in control and He's still above all that exists. There's this process in all of these plagues playing out. We see, in fact, the first couple of times Pharaoh summoned some magicians, and these would have been people who worked within the black magic art side of things. They were tapping in to power that comes from the enemy. In the first couple of plagues, they actually could recreate. But moving forward, they actually looked at Pharaoh and said, this is outside of anything we've seen or possible. This is the finger, the hand of God. Even they recognize this God is above even nature. It reminds me, actually, Jesus in Matthew 8, He and His disciples were in a boat, and they're going across this body of water, and a storm comes up, and they were all scared for their life. I love the fact that Jesus was napping in the boat. He was fast asleep. It didn't bother Him. So they wake Him up. They're like, what are we going to do? I love what He says. He goes, oh, why are you afraid, O you of little faith? Then He rose up, rebuked the wind and the sea, and they were calm. And the men marveled, saying, what sort of man is this that even winds and seas obey Him? Our God is above all, even all of creation. It's all under His hands. We saw last week that He holds everything together. I love this picture of Jesus here napping in the boat, because I think what it shows us is when we understand that our God is in control, when we understand that He's above everything, it gives us peace in the midst of the storm. It doesn't always mean that we don't get hit by the storm, but it means we can have peace in the midst of it. We go back to this picture of all of the plagues in Egypt. There's actually something a little bigger at play here. See, all of these plagues, they weren't just random things God came up with. All of them were actually directed at different gods or goddesses of the Egyptian religious beliefs. All of these things represented different things that were worshiped. Sacrifices were given to. The Nile, for instance, was seen as the main life of all of Egypt, and they had several gods and goddesses that oversaw and protected the Nile. God demonstrated, I'm in control of the Nile. Interestingly enough, with the frogs, that was a very important goddess of their belief system. A woman that had the head of a frog and the body of a woman, that she gave birth to all things, and that she was actually the wife of a creator God. And God demonstrated, you know what? I'm in control of who's born. In fact, I'm in control of how many frogs are born, so I'm going to show them everywhere. I find it also interesting, he used gnats and locusts and frogs and flies, and numerous ones of these, given the fact they saw them as a representation of a god or goddess, they couldn't kill them. If you stepped on a frog in the Egyptian culture and killed it, you could be killed for that. But God put so many around them that there were probably hundreds, if not thousands, that were accidentally killed. And so it actually caused great fear, or would have, within the people, because they're going, what's going on? It's out of control. And God's saying, it's not out of control. You just don't know the God who's actually in control. The great I am, Yahweh, is actually in control, and he's above all things. Isaiah 41:10 gives us a picture of this. I love the promise that this verse holds. God's saying, fear not, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God, and I will strengthen you, I will help you, and I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. He's saying, not only am I the God above all and in charge of everything, I'm the God that's in control, but you are in my hand. I've got you. You can have peace in the midst of the storm. Well, if you're familiar with the plagues, with the story of Moses in Egypt, you know there's still one yet to come. Moses actually went to Pharaoh and he said, in essence, you think it's been bad so far, it's about to get worse. Every firstborn living creature is going to die. Now, this was important for a couple of reasons, because actually the firstborn in a family in Egyptian culture, again, it was holding a position almost of some deity type position. Very important place. And he was threatening, basically saying, you know what, you've had every opportunity to let my people go, but God's going to demonstrate his power one more time, his control one more time. Then Moses and Aaron, they went to the Israelite people and they said, all right, God has very specific instructions for you. In fact, the first half of chapter 12 is all of the instructions that the Israelite people needed to follow in order to get ready for what was about to happen. He was saying, look, there's going to be this angel who sweeps through Egypt, and you need to be prepared. Verse 12 of chapter 12 says it this way, for I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and all of the gods of Egypt. I will execute judgment, for I am the Lord. Now, there's something I want us to understand here, a couple of things. First of all, he's saying judgment is going to fall in Egypt. Maybe you've once looked at this story and thought, okay, God, bringing frogs out of the woodwork to fill their houses, that's one thing. Fleas and locusts and all that's one thing. But do you have to go and kill people in this way? That's a little extreme. But there's something you have to understand in how God even explains it. He says this is going to land on everybody, man and beast. And I love how he says, and on all the gods of Egypt. He's almost kind of mocking them a bit. But he makes the statement, I will execute judgment. This statement here is meaning, this isn't just me wanting to go off and kill people. This is everybody in Egypt actually paying the price for what they've done. You remember last week we talked about Moses as a child. He should have been killed by the Egyptians. They killed all the males of Israel for decades. They beat them, they killed them. And God is saying, judgment is coming. Okay, this isn't about me just randomly hurting people. This is about the fact that at some point in time, we have to pay for what we've done, and judgment is coming. The story really is about the verse that comes next. Verse 13. He explained to them earlier that to get ready, you need to take a sheep, take a lamb, and you're going to sacrifice it. You're going to kill it. You're going to take the blood. You're going to paint it on the door frame of your house. You're going to take the meat. You're going to cook it. You're going to gather up all your belongings, and you're going to get ready because you're about to leave. Now, follow all of these instructions, though. And he says in verse 13, because the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. You see, what God was telling the Israelite people, judgment is coming. And everybody who's deserving of any judgment, it will fall on them unless you believe in what I've been saying, and if you're faithful to follow my instructions. What God was telling them is this isn't about whether, was it fair that God did this or did that? He's saying judgment is coming, and I want to save you. You see, the God in control ultimately delights to rescue. Our God, the creator of this universe, in his heart desires nothing more than to rescue his people. He delights to rescue his people. And I love this picture that he's giving here, and he's saying judgment is coming. And in fact, the picture that he gives is there will be a request for life in this. The only question is, will it be your life or the life of a sacrificial lamb in your place? Every firstborn was going to die as a result of this judgment, unless a sacrificial lamb came in their place. What God is demonstrating to every Israelite and to every Egyptian is that everybody faces judgment, but there's a sacrificial lamb that can take our place. It's the ultimate picture of Christ coming for us. The sacrificial lamb, the firstborn of God, sacrificed in our place that his blood would cover our sin, and God would rescue us from our sin. And you might be asking, all the other different plagues, why this one did he give them so many specific instructions? The previous several plagues only fell on the Egyptians. The Israelites were spared from those. Why did he have them go through this ritual of killing the lamb and painting the door frame? Well, I believe it was in order to show them, if you're going to believe in who I am, you also have to follow through in trusting and depending on that sacrifice in your place. Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, actually in the New Testament, give us a picture for it in how we deal with Christ. It says, for by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not of your own doing, it's the gift of God, not a result of works, so no one may boast. Salvation comes by grace through faith. And I love this word faith. What it means is a belief in the truthfulness of God and a dependence on him for our salvation. It's saying, I believe, God, what you say is true. I need to be rescued. I trust what Jesus did in my place to be what I need to be rescued. And for the Israelite people, he's saying, do you not only believe in me, but also will you trust me enough that I've given you a sacrificial lamb? That if you trust in that, then I will rescue you. So our belief in God leads us to trust and dependence. It leads us to following his instructions. God was demonstrating for everybody there, Israelites and Egyptians alike, the exact same thing Jesus would show us. The fact that all of us have a judgment to face, but God's provided a way of rescue through a sacrificial lamb, his own son. And all that Ephesians says we need to do is believe that to be true and then put our trust and dependence for that salvation in Him. We see also in the New Testament, it says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that He was raised from the dead, you will be saved. Our painting of the door frames, if you will, is us saying, I know that I'm a sinner. I know that I can't do enough to make God look over my sin. Because you look into my life and you see a lot of mistakes. But I believe that Jesus came as my sacrificial lamb. And I'm going to put my trust and dependence in Him. And He then will cause God to save me from my mistakes and pending judgment. This isn't a story about a God who is out there destroying people. It's the story of a God who's out there rescuing people. Because I don't look at God and say, why in the world would you send anybody to eternity apart from you, to a place of destruction and pain? I look at my own life and say, who am I that God would choose to save me? I know what my past is like, and there's nothing in me that's worthy. But God says, at my deepest level, I am a rescuer. And I want to rescue you if you'll put your faith and your trust in me. So this morning, as we dwell on this God, the great I am, the God in control, these are the questions I want you to ask yourself. Question number 1, do I choose in my life to acknowledge God's presence in the midst of hard times? Am I able in my life, even when things aren't going as planned, instead of being like, man, where is God in all of this, to say, God, I know you're there. Thank you for being with me. Do we acknowledge His presence in the midst of our hard times? And question number 2, how then does knowing that God is above all things change my perspective? See, when we understand that God is above all, what we can understand is that we can have peace in the midst of the storm because He's always there and He'll care for us. He's always working for our good. Then question number 3, do I acknowledge that I need a rescuer from my sin, both for eternity and also for my daily life? Do I acknowledge that I need rescuing every single day of my life to save me from my mistakes, to save me for whatever plans I might have for the future, and say, God, I need you to rescue me, both for eternity and even for daily life? Guys, we have a God who is in control today, and I know that for many of us it seems like a time that's out of control, but our God is on the throne. He's present with us while many of us are suffering and facing uncertainty. He's there with you. He's above all things. He allows us to sleep, have peace in the midst of the storm. And one day, I look forward to be able to look back over our entire life and seeing God's rescuing hand every step of the way. That's the God of Moses. That's our God who's in control. Let's pray. Father God, this morning I thank you that you are a God who is not distant, but you are close to us. That you are in control and above all things, and whether we're facing great times or difficult times, you are there with us. I thank you that you are a God who allows us to have peace in the midst of storms and difficult times. And oh God, I thank you that when we put our trust and dependence in Jesus in our lives, that you rescue us from ourselves. God, I pray over each person gathered this morning in their homes, around a screen or a TV. God, I pray that you would work and stir in their hearts. Use this time that we're facing to grow them spiritually, draw them close to you, ignite a passion and a fire for you and for your word and for the gospel work in our community. Don't waste this time in our lives, but God, do a miracle through us and through this church. And ultimately this morning, I praise you and thank you that you are our rescuer. Thank you, Jesus. In your name, amen. Church, it's been a joy to once again be with you this morning. This week, remember that your God is in control. You can have peace in the midst of anything because he is your rescuer. Go in his grace. See you next week.